and a generous and wise human being. Erik's achievements are exemplary, and his commitment to guiding others in their own explorations of the world is a model of service to which we can all aspire. I've had the pleasure of getting to know Erik over a few years, and it's my honor to call him a friend. He's someone who seeks out challenges and is completely undeterred in pursuit of his goals. I can think of no better person to address our graduates today as they begin the next stage of their journey, and I'm grateful he accepted our invitation. Please join me in giving a warm Tucson welcome to Erik Weihenmayer.
Thank you, President Garamella. Hello, everyone. Wow. I am so honored to be here with you tonight. What a monumental day of celebration and achievement. I can't imagine this is a day you'll ever forget. In fact, because I'm blind and I can't see you, maybe I was thinking that you might bear down and give me a wildcat roar. Yeah. Nice. That's the spirit. So, I was thinking, because of this day of celebration, I framed my remarks around this idea of success and accomplishment. I've had a few successes. I'm very proud to have started my career as a middle school English and math teacher just down the road up in Phoenix. And I got this idea to make a life as a blind adventurer. The blind adventuring business wasn't very well defined. It wasn't an idea that many venture capitalists would have banked on, but I've been making it work for almost 30 years now. And I'm really proud to have been able to live a life of adventure as a blind person, getting to climb rock and ice faces around the world, getting to climb the 7 summits, the tallest peak in every continent, getting to kayak rivers around the world from Peru to Mexico to the Grand Canyon. Check out some highlights here.
Good job, man. You did it, man. Woo! On top of the world. You're on top of the world. The apex of the planet.
So, thank you. So successes are fun to talk about, but I think what doesn't get talked about enough is the struggle of how we get there. Because it has been a struggle to live this life. I call it a no barriers life. First of all, to define it, and then to push the parameters of what it can mean. And then I think the hardest part for me, at least, is those days where you feel like you're failing it and you're bleeding it. And I think part of the equation of understanding this life is diving into the learning process, this process of growth and change and transformation that we're all a part of, and then trying to illuminate what that experience looks like. What does that map look like that we are building to navigate our lives forward through that incredibly murky terrain between base camp and the summit? And I wish that process was easy. It's not, as you know. It's getting harder by the day. I was part of a TV show called Welcome to Earth a few years ago, and they sent all these explorers out into the world to study these natural phenomena. And I got to go to the island chain of Vanuatu, way out in the South Pacific, and explore the most active volcano on Earth. It's called Yasser. And little did I know we'd be rappelling down into the very bowels of the volcano to set up this scientific equipment that would study the sound waves of the volcano and maybe predict future eruptions around the world and save lives. We survived that, and I stood on the rim afterwards with the host, Will Smith. Sorry to name drop, but it was cool meeting Will. And by the way, he was very kind. He didn't slap me off the side of the volcano, if you're wondering. I sat there listening to the most beautiful, most intense sound I think I've ever heard. Truck-sized magma bombs exploding out of these vents a half a mile into the sky and then splashing back down into these lakes filled with lava. And then it would reverberate and crash up against the walls of the caldera like the waves of an ocean. Check this out.
Like looking into the gates of hell.
So beautiful, so beautiful. And standing there on the rim with Will, it was a stark reminder that although, we wish growth was this nice, neat, consistent arc upward with a nice crescendo, and maybe we hear some violin music and we eat some popcorn and everyone goes home changed forever. It doesn't work that way. Growth is more like a volcano spewing magma into the sky, annihilating everything in its path. And over time, it lays a second skin over the earth, and it cools, and it nourishes the soil, and all life comes blazing back even stronger. It is a continual process of endings and renewals, death and rebirth. And as one of my climbing partners says, it ain't for the faint-hearted. I've been fascinated by how people and how communities move forward through adversity. And my second book was called The Adversity Advantage. And I teamed up with this scientist, Dr. Paul Stoltz, and he is an expert in adversity, helps people around the world change their relationship with adversity, make it healthier. And we did a study around the world, and we came away understanding that, very simply put, people fall into three categories. We call them quitters, campers, or climbers. Now, quitters are self-explanatory. We won't talk about them tonight. But campers, we found, were a fascinating group because, they make up so much of the world. These people who start out climbing with excitement and optimism and hope, as I think we all do. And then somewhere along that ascent, things get in the way. We lose belief in ourselves or in the cause or in the team. We feel cynicism pouring down around our minds, like prison bars or victimization. Or we go out and we do something big and bold, and we get shoved back, we get shattered. It sends a trauma through our soul, like one of those old record players with a needle that just keeps skipping over the same beat. Or maybe we're plodding up the mountain slowly but surely, one barrier after the next. They just keep getting in the way, killing our momentum, shoving us to the sidelines. Now we're camping. Now sometimes we're stagnating. But worse than all of that, all our energy, all our contributions, all our life force, it's lost to the world. Climbers are a rare group, and if I could see, I'd be looking at a lot of climbers out here. These are people who continue to figure out a way to grow and evolve and explore and challenge themselves every day of their lives till the day they die. And so the question I ask myself every day is, how do I climb when it makes so much more sense? It is so much easier to camp. Now, part of my journey was a literal climbing journey. I wanted to climb the 7th summit. My first peak of the 7 was Denali, the great one, the high one in the Inuit language, 20,300 feet. We flew planes onto the glacier, and 19 days later we staggered across the summit ridge to the summit. It turned out to be Helen Keller's birthday when we stood on top. And we got down safely to our igloo that we have built up there. And our team leader, Chris Morris, he's kind of a wild man. He's from Alaska. And he's famous for these witticisms that he calls positive pessimisms. Positive pessimisms. You're sitting out in a terrible storm. Chris will look up, big smile on his face. He'll say something like, "Sure is cold out here, but at least it's windy." Or he'll say, "Sure, I've been climbing a long way, but at least we're lost." On the top of Aconcagua, the tallest peak in South America, he gave me a big hug, and he said, "Big E," he said, "you may be blind, but you sure are slow." I wasn't expecting that. I said, "Chris, you're not the nicest guy in the world, but at least you're stupid." But I love positive pessimisms. Maybe you guys will adopt them into your graduate experience here. You know, try this one. It may have taken me 7 years to graduate, but at least I'm moving back with my parents. I don't know. Maybe that's on the nose, I'm sorry. But positive pessimisms are such a wonderful way to say, hey, it's a hard road ahead, it always will be. But we own that road. We own it together. I also understand camping because when I was in middle school, I went blind from this very rare eye disease. And it was like a storm that had descended upon me with such force, such viciousness. I thought I'd have to be crushed by it. Being led into school as a newly blinded person, being led to the bathroom, being led to the cafeteria, sitting at a table by myself, listening to all the excitement and laughter and joy and food fights passing me by that I wanted to be a part of. And I was afraid to go blind and see darkness. But what I was more afraid of was that I would be shoved to the sidelines into that dark place and I'd be left there and I would be forgotten. A life that was meaningless, a life lived for nothing. Going blind was scary, but not fully living. Well, that was terrifying. And even though I was going through a hard time, I had a wonderful support system. My dad was my best, greatest mentor, my greatest hero. His role was made even more important when my mom at that time was killed in a car accident. And my dad stepped up when a lot of dads had their kid on their knee reading them fairy tales. Mine was reading me motivational poems. This is my dad in his later life reading his favorite poem called
I have a placard. I send it to sons and daughters when I think they could use it, but it's when things go wrong, as they sometimes will, on the road you're trudging to is all uphill, and the funds are low, and the debts are high, and you want to sigh, and you have to cry. But when care is pressing you down a bit, rest if you must, but don't you quit.
My dad, thank you. My dad, he had an amazing story of his own. Because he graduated from Princeton, he was the captain of his football team. It was in the time of the Vietnam War, and he thought it was so unfair these poor kids were getting drafted. He enlisted in the Marines, and he was a Marine aviator. He flew A-4 Skyhawks, and he said the scariest part of the mission was when he was coming home in the dark, and he didn't know where the runway was, and they would light up the runway, and what relief that would give him. And I couldn't fly A-4 Skyhawks, but with barely being able to see out of my right eye, I used to take my mountain bike down my driveway, and I'd fly down that driveway and I'd hit these ramps, and I'd fly through the air and I'd land on a big plyboard landing ramp that I'd built. And there was one day where I lost so much sight that I couldn't see the ramps anymore. I went off the side and I flipped over. There's some blood and tears, and I pushed the bike up the driveway into the garage. I was devastated because another chapter of my life had just closed. And I didn't notice my dad was painting a piece of furniture in the garage. I woke up the next morning, he said, "Eric, you should try the ramp again." I don't know, maybe I got some sight back in the night. So I tried. I came around the corner. My dad was right, I could see that ramp. It was lit up like contrails in the sky, like bioluminescence in a dark sea. See, in the middle of the night, my dad had gone out and he'd painted the ramp very bright orange. and I could see it again. And I got my confidence back. I jumped over the ramps. My two brothers and my dad laid up between the ramps, so I jump over them like Evel Knievel. And see, my dad could have said, hey buddy, no more bike riding, it's just not in the cards. But instead he did something miraculous. He painted the ramp a bright orange, and he lit up the runway for me. And it was the first time that I glimpsed what the snow barrier's life might become. It was a short-lived victory because a month later I went totally blind. And I remember I was reading Braille. I got this letter in Braille. It was a group taking blind kids rock climbing. And I ran my hand up the wall of my room, and I thought, who would be stupid enough to take a blind kid rock climbing? So I signed up. Because I didn't want to build walls around myself and protect myself from pain and loss. I wanted to tear down those walls I wanted to attack. And I found through trial and error that I could do a pull-up and I could scan my hand across the face. And just before I was ready to lose strength in my forearms and fingers, I had to fall. I'd find enough to dig into a little crack or pocket to keep me stuck to the face a few seconds longer. I left a lot of blood and skin on the rock. I got to the top. It was so exhilarating. It was so beautiful, so vibrant. It was painful. It was like a rebirth. I gotta say though, as beautiful and vibrant as it was also scary. And there's one thing that hasn't changed much since that very first time I went rock climbing, but nearing 40 years now. That's the reach. Doesn't really matter whether you can see or not. I think we're all in the same boat. We're all reaching into darkness. We're predicting and calculating and hoping and praying. Our algorithms, our software, it leads us to believe that we may find what we are looking for. But we understand there's no guarantee. It's that moment when we've reached out, our minds, our bodies, we've committed to the reach. We know it's almost impossible to turn back. The fear of that is foundational. The fear of flopping on our face, of making a mistake that affects so many other people. The fear that we're not as good at something as we wish we were. The fear that we give 100% of our heart and we still fall short. Those fears, they conspire against us and they can paralyze us. So maybe we decide to stop reaching. I think there's a big difference between campers and climbers. Climbers understand that life is an ongoing, never-ending process of reaching out into the darkness when we don't know exactly what we'll find, constantly reaching towards immense possibilities. They're never seen, they're only sensed, while so many others allow that darkness to paralyze them. I reached out that day, and I know you guys have reached out every day that have led you right here today. And I guess here's the catch. You're waiting for it, right? Here's the catch. When we reach, when we climb higher and higher up the mountain, higher than we've ever climbed, we bring adversity into our lives. I think there is a very powerful relationship between the extent of our reach and the amount of adversity we accept into our lives. The two go hand in hand. And I think that relationship works just as powerfully in reverse. Because when we face adversity, it requires us to reach farther. And I've met so many people over the years that have had the courage not to bury their head in the sand, but to square off with adversity and walk into the storm. Like my friend Mandy Harvey. Mandy, from a young age, she had her life planned out. She loved music. And she was performing in front of her middle school class. She got so nervous, she puked on the kids in the front row. So she realized that wasn't her career path. She decided she'd be a music teacher and a choir director. And then she was diagnosed with this connective tissue disorder. And by the end of her freshman year in college, she was totally, profoundly deaf. She was kicked out of the program. She told me that her dream was a corpse. And not only had she lost the potential career, but she lost the music, as she said, of everyday life. Birds chirping, leaves being rustled by the wind, rain tapping on the roof, the laughter of her future children. And then the functional sounds like the rattle of the car when you need a mechanic, or the fear, the terror when you go to sleep and you know you will never hear that fire alarm. And she was in a dark, dark place. It was her dad who actually asked her downstairs to perform and play like they had when she was growing up almost every night. And just to appease him, she said yes. And when she first played her guitar, she was bitter, strumming silent chords, singing a song in a voice she couldn't hear. And she looked over at her dad, and there were tears pouring down his face. She thought, I must sound horrible. Instead, he said 4 magic words: Mandy, you sound beautiful. And with those words, she felt her possibilities morphing and expanding just enough that she said yes the next night and the next night. And over time, she began to be able to distinguish the different vibrations of those different chords through the vibrations she was feeling through her fingertips, up through her arms, her elbows, through her shoulders, into her heart. She began testing singing by putting her hand on her throat and feeling the vibrational tones, deeper tones coming from down low, higher tones coming from her face, even through her navel cavity. She began performing with other band members by taking off her shoes and standing barefoot on the stage and feeling the vibration through her feet, through her body. And then the craziest part, she took part in a bunch of our No Barriers programs, and she emerged with this idea that terrified her. She wanted to write her own music as a deaf person. And she asked herself a fundamental question: what is in my way? And she knew the answer instantly, because it wasn't her connective tissue disorder or her deafness or her shyness or her anxieties or fear. What was in Mandy's way was her. And so she went home and she sat down in the living room and she wrote a song. It took her 10 minutes. She called it Try. And then a national TV show, America's Got Talent, asked her to perform that song. She performed it in front of millions of people and inspired them all. That song alone has now been heard almost 1 billion times. She told me recently that she doesn't miss hearing anymore because the sound she used to hear through her ears could never match the beauty that she hears inside of her mind. She performed that song in front of our No Barriers community just a couple weeks ago. She said, Eric, do you want to accompany on the guitar? I said, Mandy, I'm just a, hobby guitar player. She said, Eric, just try. Check this out. People like Mandy, I call them alchemists. They're able to take the lead that life piles on top of them and figure out a way to transform it into gold. With an alchemist, they don't just do the traditional things that you always hear about. They don't just survive adversity or deal with it or just even overcome it, as we hear so often. These alchemists, they do something different. They've figured out how to seize hold of that storm of adversity that swirls around us, to harness that energy and use that energy to propel themselves forward to places they would have never gone to in any other way. With an alchemist, you can throw them in the midst of a fierce, uncertain environment. You strip away their resources. You throw roadblocks in front of them. They'll still find a way to win. Not despite adversity, because of it. Imagine if adversity weren't the dead end, it weren't the reason why we fell short. What if adversity were the pathway to the summit? My friend Hugh Herr is another alchemist. He was a brilliant climber when he was a teenager. He's one of the co-founders of No Barriers along with me. Brilliant climber. He was climbing Mount Washington in New Hampshire in the winter. And he got to the summit in a terrible storm. He went down the wrong side of the mountain. When he was rescued, his legs were frozen. They had to be amputated. He woke up in the hospital and he looked down at where his feet were supposed to be protruding. Instead, the sheets just dropped into space. And he wailed from the deepest of places imagined pain could come from. He told me though, he said, Erik, the greatest breakthrough of his life was this one day when he looked down at where his legs were supposed to be, and instead of seeing loss and pain, what he saw was a blank canvas. And he was the painter. In a way, he was free to begin again, to build in that space anything his mind could conceive. And it was a misnomer that space is a void or a vacuum. No, it is loss. Loss is energy. And over time, he had begun to transform that loss into the seeds of creation. And he got to work, started testing these composite materials, different shaped feet. He stumbled upon a pair of feet that are like little doorstops. He could wedge them into seams no human foot could even attempt to stand up in. And by that relentless reinvention and iteration, he got back to climbing. He was ranked in the top 10 climbers in the country. They called him the first $6 million man. In fact, there's a climb where I live in Colorado. Nobody could get to the top of this thing. Hugh went up and he flashed it. Somebody said, Hugh, oh my gosh, what is your secret? He said, well, I noticed there was a hole out of people's reach, so I just made my legs a foot longer. That's what an alchemist does. And it's cool he got back to climbing, but these alchemy journeys take these crazy sideways turns, because in the process of building those new legs, Hugh realized that he was an inventor. He'd never seen himself in that way before. He wasn't even a good student. He went back to community college. He worked his way through his PhD program in bioengineering. He now runs the biomechatronics laboratory at MIT. He builds the most sophisticated prosthetic legs in the world that are enabling people to walk and dance for the very first time. This is alchemy. This is not some dumb cliche about turning lemons into lemonade. This is a deep, difficult, soulful process. It's half engineering, half poetry. And it is a practice that we continue to pursue and perfect and come back to time and time again when we are faced with challenge. It is struggle into wisdom, into innovation, into empathy, connection, into love. And you don't have to be disabled to be an alchemist. As a 56-year-old person, I just can't even pretend to understand the challenges that you all face and that you will continue to face as a generation. I mean, isolation and disconnection and loneliness seem like an epidemic. And poverty and disease and food deserts that stretch across America. And hateful, toxic messaging coming through social media and even through the federal government. And environmental devastation, and climate change, and a broken healthcare system, and wars that create terrible bloodshed and death around the world. Yes, to be blunt, these are the things that might crush us, or they might become the most potent fuel source we have for transformation. See, I think the world is crying out for alchemy. It is begging for it. And you're the alchemist. You are the world's best hope for alchemy. I hope you heed that call. I know you will. Years ago, Hugh, her, and I were standing on a summit near Moab, Utah, way up high. I asked him to tell me what was the view below me. He said, Erik, it's a flat desert with hundreds of orangish red pinnacles of every size imaginable, all unique and spectacular, rising up and piercing this impossibly blue sky. And I thought, what a miraculous process. You know, these pinnacles sculpted by wind and rain and temperature over thousands of years. And I thought, in some ways, we are those pinnacles. We can't control the elements. We can't control the things that happen to us. But unlike those pinnacles, we do have a choice. Do we allow the elements to diminish us, to pulverize us, to shape us into something bitter and monstrous? Or do we allow those elements to shape us into something beautiful and purposeful and profound? That is our choice. So I don't wish you a life of comfort and prosperity, a life of camping. Instead, I wish you a life rich with adversity. Adversity that sculpts you, that stretches you, that tests you, that pushes you to reach just a little bit farther, that propels you out into the world in these chaotic, unexpected ways towards new discoveries. I can almost guarantee you, it will not be easy, but it'll always be a great adventure. To the University of Arizona class of 2025, congratulations. Keep climbing. Thank you so much.